Welcome to the P's and Q's podcast. I'm your host, Quinay Foray, and I'm living my best life. And I want to help you live your best life. On today's episode, I am so honored and excited to introduce to you guys one of my soul sisters. Her name is Lauren Baggett, and she is an artist, a designer, and a spiritual healer. One of my spiritual mentors as well. In addition to that, her mission is to use her spiritual gifts to help humanity in whatever way she can through her many gifts. Lauren, welcome.
Hi.
I'm so honored and grateful to have you here. Thank you, my sister. Thank you, my love.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness. You guys are in for a huge treat. But before we get into it, you know we got to do our 3 fun facts. Number 1, during the pandemic, I lived in Mérida, Mexico, which is the safest city in Mexico, and it's the second safest city in North America next to Quebec. Number 2, someone actually asked this in a comment. I'm always talking about travel, and they said, but do you ever go on cruises? And I have. I've been on 2 cruises, and most recently, this January 2023, I went on Groove Cruise. I had one of the best times of my entire life. Number 3, I had my first Akashic reading back in 2020 when I was living in Mérida, and it was actually through a conversation with this lovely goddess. So we're gonna get into it today. We're gonna talk about excavating your soul and the shadow work involved with that. And Lauren's going to give us so much information. You've been a great guide to me on this life journey. And I thank you so much for your presence.
When we met, I was expanding in a way that I hadn't before. I had just had a baby and was starting to work again. And but at that time, I felt this call to dive deeper into my spirituality in terms of how I serve, because I was already doing my own thing with my spirituality. Right. But I felt like it was time to start to share my light and what I know and be of service. And I was doing it in a smaller capacity, because before that I was just doing it for myself.
Which is great in and of itself.
And and so thank you for trusting me to, do that journey and do that work with you. Because I received a lot of knowledge and wisdom from that as well. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah.
What a gift that is, like the exchange of it all.
But that's what it is. That's what the universe is. At some point we play both roles as student and teacher. You know, we think it's like, okay, I'm teacher and that's what I am, or I'm student and that's what I am. But even with like my kids, my children, as I'm teaching them, are teaching me simultaneously. We're learning together. Because it's challenging when you have an awareness of how you want to live your life and how connected you want to be with yourself. And as you're remembering this, and then you're showing others, like your children, and like, okay, I'm learning this too. Let's learn this together. Because typically we come from a perspective of, I have to master this before I can share this. But sometimes the showing your work, doing your work together can really help the journey. But it really starts with creating a safe place for yourself to do that work with yourself. Because then you can't create a safe place for anyone else if you're not truly creating one for you.
You mentioned something earlier when we were talking, and you said most people think of spirituality as this like, oh, super zen, happy place. And that is a part of it. But once we start excavating and doing that much deeper work, that's when we get to the like, what is going on? Kind of thing. But it's so necessary.
It's necessary because that's when we start to see the things that we have been either avoiding or not even aware of, completely in our blind spot. We enter life and we're conditioned in life to hold this perspective of in survival mode of you versus the world, you coming out into the world, and you have to guard yourself. And although that is true to some regard, but also your approach into the world will change what you get out of it. So looking at the things in our lives that aren't working, and because there's fundamentally people can find common ground in this regard, that there's something we all are kind of desiring to some degree. Right. We may not even realize it, but truthfully, as human beings, there is a state of peace, inner peace, that we are longing for. And sometimes we'll have it and we'll be afraid of it. Yeah. Or we want it but don't know how to obtain it.
Yeah.
And the first thing we want to do is fix everything that doesn't seem like it's contributing to our peace. It's understanding that authentic peace versus the peace that will keep perpetuating the same patterns. Because sometimes we perceive disturbances and taking away my peace when it's really something to shake you up out of a pattern that's not serving you. There needs to be something looked at under the hood. Ooh. And triggers, that's one.
Yeah.
I'm going to start there.
Let's start there. That's a big one. That's a real important one. I remember when I realized that the things that were creating resistance in me had everything to do with me and nothing really to do with the other person or the other experience. It was all lying within me. Yeah. I'm the common denominator.
Oftentimes when something is triggering to us, triggering is something that evokes an emotional response that creates this dissonance inside. It's disharmonic. It doesn't feel good. Because we don't, resist things that excite us. We don't resist things that pleasure us, but things that make us feel like, When we get into that space, our tendency is to find the source of the trigger and chastise it as you're the problem. This is the problem. Whether it's a situation, a person, an outcome, whatever, that's the issue.
It's outside of us.
It's outside of us.
Yeah.
So I've got to somehow control and manage this thing outside of me so that it won't disrupt my peace inside. So our tactic typically is to address the person, the situation, avoidance through avoidance or confrontation. What has helped me in my life and totally changed my life to where I can find this sense of peace even in the midst of a storm and anchor into it is when I started looking at these triggers as, that made me feel something. Before I go talk to that person. Now, some situations do require you to lay your boundary and, respond.
Yes,
of course. Not react, but respond.
Yes.
But I will also do that other side of the work, which is reflect inward. Why did that make me feel that way?
Yeah.
And when we can sit with ourselves and we can kind of give room for those feelings to kind of be unearthed and discovered, we can find the root of it. And where it comes from and where it stems from, and we can pour love into that, address that. And that way it's not a symptom and it's not leaking out into interactions at a coffee shop or, pumping gas and you get into it with somebody, Yeah. It's addressing the core wounds that trigger all of those little interactions, and all those interactions are purposefully placed to turn your gaze back in. So that you can address the real situation. So we're not repeating these triggers. Similar to relationship patterns, people will find it's these men out here, it's these women out here.
Right. But, outside, of course.
Yeah. But what is it in us that is, one, drawing energetically us into these experiences?
It's because our soul requires us to address it. And we will get the same pattern and the same loop until feedback loop until we actually look in that mirror and start going inward and resolve. I love how you said pour love into it.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, one thing is, whenever we uncover something about ourselves, a truth about ourselves, something that we don't necessarily want to continue, we don't like, it's not how we identify ourselves, right? Yeah. It's very easy for the thought streams to switch to very judgmental and self-criticizing and beating yourself down. And now I like to look at it like this. If there's aspects of me and one is holding this pattern of behavior that's clearly not serving me anymore, I can see that that's the problem. And I see it how it's interfacing with all my relationships, right?
Yeah.
But if I start beating up on that part of me isn't going to open up to learning more of why I'm even carrying this pattern, one, and two, be willing to integrate into something new. So if you think of a child that has behavioral issues, well, if you're beating up on the child and you're saying, why you're worthless, why didn't you
so bad,
get it together?
Yeah.
They're not going to feel safe to explore why, because you have to create that safe space for yourself to, lean into the curiosity of why. Why am I doing that? Not in a judgmental curiosity, why the fuck,
Yeah,
but in a loving, wanting to help. When I started approaching myself like that, it changed everything for me. And actually, there was a video by a spiritual speaker named Matt Kahn my mom told me about, and it was called Respecting Your Shadow. Our shadow is the parts of our subconscious that holds patterns that we adapted for survival, whether it's conditioned patterns through family relationships, societal patterning, things that we're kind of indoctrinated to.
Yeah.
And, real life experiences that we've lived that create a sort of perception of the world, that create patterns of behavior, all based out of survival mode, how to keep you safe. And so these patterns, they don't help us expand into higher versions of ourselves to where we can really be our authentic self. They're more like armor.
Yeah.
And they weigh us down. So when we start the process of stripping away the armor, it's a very raw process. If we're ripping the armor away and we're not healing the wounds with love, then the scarring, it's deep. And then it makes it harder for the pattern to clear. When I was beating myself up about things I wanted to change, it was almost like I dug deeper into the pattern because then I became at odds with myself.
Right.
And this inner conflict became worse than the external situations.
Yes.
And so the inner peace is really the goal. And it starts when you can love and pour into yourself.
For someone who is in this process of doing this deep shadow work, recognizing those patterns and pouring that love into themselves, what are some ways that they can start pouring into their cup?
Well, one way, people typically want to journey down spiritualities through meditation, and I think that is a great way to start. That's where I started. But then the pitfalls you hit is there's a way people think you're supposed to meditate. Because if the mind is not conditioned to be still, that's not going to happen right away. It's not, and then that's when we then turn on ourselves, and then we give up the process, and that's it. We did it. We tried it. It didn't work.
It's not for me.
It's not for me.
Yeah.
and that's one thing that when I work with people and I introduce meditation as a tool, we start with don't try to clear your mind. Don't try to clear your mind. You're missing a fundamental first step to learning yourself, because if you really want to do the shadow work, what that process is learning you inside and out, like truly learning you, not the you want everybody to perceive you to be.
Right.
That is hiding all of that, but the true you. And the true you is underneath everything that's in the shadow. Removing those layers starts by observing the mental body. So I look at myself and across like a dimensional span. So there's my physical body. Yeah. That's one dimension of self. My emotional body. That's another dimension of self. And then my mental body. And it goes beyond, but we'll start there.
We'll start with those three. Perfect.
Observing the mental body and how the mind works. Because if you look at it like a computer, how does it operate?
Yeah.
What's the software? What's the hardware? What is it like? How does it function? Because each person's mind works differently based on, like we talked about, the conditioning, the patterns, the experiences. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So when we go into meditation, There's a couple ways I do this. So I'll observe, just candidly observe. And that means my mind, as I'm observing, will often critique the observations. Okay, I sometimes allow that.
Okay.
I like to see how the aspects of me, because there are aspects of us. If you look at, there's a side to our personality, right?
Right.
That's how we can perceive it. But and that plays out in our mind too. When a thought comes up, how these aspects kind of either attack, reject, support.
Yes.
These thoughts.
Yes. I do.
So I'll sometimes allow the commentary, right?
Okay.
The peanut gallery.
Peanut gallery.
Yeah, you can make comments, and sometimes I look at it like a Google Drive. When you're sharing a folder.
Yeah.
And then you adjust the settings so that it's view only.
Yes.
So no editing, no commenting. Right. It's just you just look at it. So I will visualize that in my mind. Me just clicking it into view only.
I love this.
Telling my mind, you don't have permission to comment or critique. We're just objectively observing.
Okay.
And when we remove ourselves out of that, the being the aspects, and we move into that higher self place where we're just observing how we interact with ourselves.
Yes.
That's a power move.
Ooh, that's big power.
Big power move, because once you can see a pattern, you have the power to adjust the pattern.
Yes.
But to truly see a pattern, you have to see it with objective eyes, not through a lens of criticism. We want to fix it immediately.
Yes.
And when we rush into wanting to fix it, we're also bypassing a lot of the work. Awareness. Awareness is a key word in spirituality. Action is very important. Taking action, making shifts, having a will to do so is very important as well. But you can't have any alignment to the will and to the action if we don't have awareness.
Yes.
So sitting with the awareness is really important initially before we want to make those changes. And when we can understand the why, we get to that root. And so we're not just cutting the top and it's growing back.
It's continue to sprout out.
Yeah, exactly. We can really unearth it and heal it from the core.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wow. Did you guys hear that? Especially about meditation.
Yeah.
I think it's so important that you touched on that because even myself, I talk a lot about being still and clearing the mind and thinking of thoughts like clouds as they roll in, observing them and observing them roll away. Yeah. I just love how you gave another perspective on the space with the thoughts and having the ability to just put view only.
Yeah.
Or the times when you allow the peanut gallery to get involved,
Yeah.
which is
To comment,
to comment
Yeah.
and critique.
Yeah.
That's a place of true observation mastery. Thank you so much. There were so many light codes in the things that you say, which is why the moment God told me I had to start a podcast, you were one of the first people that I thought of that I wanted to have on P's and Q's. Thank you.
I'm so glad it finally aligned.
I know. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And
thank you so much.
I thank you. We are going to also be having another conversation with a panel of ladies, and I'm excited for that conversation as well. And you are my soul sister for life.
I love you so much.
I love you so much. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much. Everybody, I want you to connect with Lauren on Instagram. I will put the link in the description as well. You can also find her on her website, which is lbcomposition.art. So I love you all. I love you so much.
Love you too.
Thank you
Thank
all
you.
for being here. And see you next time.